Welcome, everyone. My name is Piper Hendricks. I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power, and we are so glad that you're here on this August Friday or later as you're watching the recording if you are not able to make it here live. I had not heard the song that greeted you just now until Matt, who you'll meet in just a moment, suggested it, but I love it. Imagining a world that is better than the one we're in now and then trying to make that vision a reality is really hard work, but we do it anyway. And supporting you in that hard work is what we do at Stories Change Power, as you'll see in the updated website that we just launched yesterday, including through short courses like Storytelling 101, Ethical Storytelling, and others that will launch this fall. Just 4 quick reminders before we move into the webinar as you settle in: captions, chat, Q&A, and camera. You are off camera, so be comfortable. You're off mic. Do whatever you need to do to be comfortable as we dive in. Use the captions as you need them. Your AI can watch this recording later, but our live chat is for constructive conversation among humans only, and the recording will not include the chat. And then lastly, you should see a little box with a question mark. That is the Q&A box where you've got questions. Please put those there, as that's an easier place for us to see those when we get to the Q&A section. If we're not able to reach those today, we will answer them in an upcoming newsletter or LinkedIn. We will get back to you. And if you feel more comfortable, you can always answer or ask your question anonymously. And with that, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Matthew Taylor. He is an associate professor in the School of Journalism and Strategic Media at Middle Tennessee State University, where he serves as co-director of the Social Media Insights Lab, where he will be sharing a lot of his insights from that lab today. He believes in the importance of integrating theory and practice and has pursued hands-on learning through participation in a PhD digital boot camp sponsored by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and ongoing involvement with the Social Intelligence Lab, which was founded by Dr. Gillian Nye. Matt's research has been published in more places than I can name today. Just a couple of them are the Journal of Nonprofit and the Journal of Radio and Audio Media. Matt, I think I might have accidentally cut off one of those names. I apologize. That will be in the resources. As I mentioned, there are many, and the Journal of Public Relations Education. Matt has served as a faculty expert on social media topics for stories in the news at outlets including Neiman Reports, the Times Higher Education, and the Christian Science Monitor. My goodness, I can get everything out today. Matt's teaching and research are informed by more than a decade of professional experience, as he'll share today. Lastly, Matt earned his doctorate in mass communication at UNC Chapel Hill, where he was a Roy H. Park PhD fellow. And with that, Matt, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Glad to have this opportunity.
Great. As always, we like to start with a poll to give you a sense of who's on the call today. So we've got 2 questions. Those will pop up in just a moment. We made a little tweak to the first one, asking instead of how long have you been in advocacy, how long have you been an advocate? So notice if you're a regular on our webinars, that's slightly different. We had some folks who said, I'm not really sure how to answer that question because it may not be an official field, and yet you've been somebody who has been trying to change laws, change policies, change the world around you, change systems for all of your life potentially. Or maybe you're new. I'm seeing some answers coming in. It looks like, Matt, we've got a lot of folks who are new. Everybody will share the results with you in just a moment. And if you don't advocate, if you're in a different field and you're here, welcome. We are so glad that you're here. Everyone is welcome. The second question we've got there is your level of familiarity with social listening. And for some of you, that might be brand new. Some, it may be somewhat familiar. Maybe a lot of you are already doing a lot of social listening and you want to do more. Maybe you consider yourself an expert. So seeing a lot of results coming in will give folks a few more minutes if you're just getting to the poll, or if you're on a different device and the poll is tricky, please feel free to put your answers in the chat. Those 2 questions again are: how long have you been an advocate? And what is your level of familiarity with social listening? So I'm seeing a little slowdown in our responses. Let's go ahead and give folks maybe another 3, 2. I don't want to cut anybody off. If I accidentally do, please feel free to add into the chat, but I'll go ahead and end the poll here. And you will see that we've got quite a few folks who are new to advocacy, a few pros. And then for most folks, let's see, we've got about a third where this topic is brand new. Uh, Almost half where folks are familiar with social listening, some a bit more familiar. And then I think we've got one expert in the group. So welcome everyone. And with that, Matt, I will turn it over to you, and then we'll come back for Q&A at the end of the session.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here um, as I get started. And I love that question and the rewording of that question, in part because I worked in advocacy communication for a few years, really enjoyed it. And I stay in touch with a couple of folks that I worked with to kind of bounce things off of as I'm doing research, as I'm learning things in the digital space. One is Steve Weiss, who works with the American Heart Association. Another is Brian Rubenstein, who does consulting on grassroots advocacy. But one of the things I've said is, hey, I kind of miss it. I enjoyed it. And they remind me like, hey, you can volunteer, you can still be involved. So I love the wording of that question. So I want to start, I've got listening and learning up there. And initially I had named this Listen and Learn. And then I realized that almost seemed like it was more direct address. Like I was telling my audience that, and realized that's going to sound really haughty, which is not at all my intent. And I share that for two reasons. One being that as advocacy communicators and communicators generally, we know that words matter and wording matter. So that's why I shifted that some. Uh, but the other piece of it is I do want to express at the outset a tremendous appreciation and respect for the work that you all are doing in advocacy and advocacy communication. My own career, I've done a number of things. I started out in community journalism, and I didn't come to advocacy until actually after I'd done my PhD. And I worked with the American Cancer Society as a senior writer for advocacy communication. I had never been exposed to that world, and I loved it for a lot of reasons. One, coming out of academic environment, I got to actually see like practical use of a lot of things I was learning about, which I hadn't seen as much when I was studying topics. It also allowed someone that has had a cynical heart toward politics at various times to feel some hope and see politics and political happenings from a different perspective, the advocacy perspective that was there, especially for me with the American Cancer Society. I was always proud to say I was working there. I lost my own mom to cancer when I was young. And so to be able to do work that was advocating so others wouldn't have to have that same experience was something I was really proud of and really enjoyed. I want to go back to that experience for just a moment at the outset here. The last step of my application and interview process at the American Cancer Society was a writing test. So I'd done interviews, met people there, but I was with a couple other finalists and we had to do a writing test. And I had about an hour to work on this in just an office by myself at the Cancer Society's office there in DC. And I had a big folder of information with all sorts of things about cancer issues and this sort of thing. And the end result is I had to write a press release about an advocacy issue at the Cancer Society. And so I was shuffling through these papers and trying to become familiar with this issue, feeling the stress that comes with that kind of situation. And then there was this moment where I relaxed and I got to work. And that moment came because I realized they've given me more information than I need, right? That part of this is not just writing, but it's sifting through this information, figuring out what's important, and then using that important stuff to write this press release. And so the last part of it allowed me to get to work and feel a little bit more relaxed in that space. And so I felt good. And I'll confess, I also felt good as I was leaving the building because I happened to peek in another office and saw one of the other finalists and they looked really nervous. And I said, okay, maybe that's good. But that experience, I share that because we're doing a similar thing with social listening. There's lots and lots of data out there, and we are sifting through it and trying to find what's important, and more importantly, in the advocacy space, what's important to us. And so I want to start by giving a few things that we get wrong about social media. One, it's not a gauge of public opinion, and I'm guessing most people know that anyway, but it seems like we need a constant reminder because often we see it used, particularly in the news media, as if it is a gauge of public opinion, or even if we're in those spaces, it can feel overwhelming, like, wow, does everyone feel this way? Even at its peak, Twitter's gone through a lot of changes, but when it was at its peak, and we saw a lot of journalists and political journalists operating in that space, it gave an outsized feel of this is how people are thinking. But even at the peak, you were looking at about roughly 30% of Americans that were using Twitter. So it really gave us the impression that this is how everyone feels. And we have to take a step back and be reminded it's actually a small portion of those folks. I think it's also important to recognize that social media does not exist in isolation. Early on with social media, there was a lot of focus on, is it useful? What can we do with it? Can we compel people to action? And we were asking a lot of social media. It's a tool in your tool belt. It's one of several tools you're using. And I think it's important to remember it's part of a larger strategic plan that complements other things you're doing. We can't expect it to do everything itself. As it relates to social media listening, this idea of not existing in isolation, I'm going to be sharing some insights and some data today, but those are one piece, right? We need to triangulate. That's a word you'll hear a lot in social media listening, using other sources we have and seeing how does this compare? Is this aligning with it? Is there anything new? But again, we want to triangulate and use other forms of data in addition to social media listening. And I think also social media does not replace real relationships. I did a study where I actually looked at Twitter chats, as they used to be called, for an advocacy organization. I did what was called a social network analysis, where you can see the patterns of who's participating in that conversation, which direction, are people just commenting out, are there responses? And one of the interesting takeaways, and it was consistent with a lot of other research in this area, is that there are a small group of people that drive the conversation. So in that Twitter chat, there were a lot of people that were contributing the minimal amount. So maybe someone does a retweet and now they're part of that conversation. But one of the things that it had me thinking about is we could still use this space because as an organization, we could look and identify who are those most engaged users and look for ways to deepen our relationship with them and maybe even eventually move that relationship offline and try and get them involved in advocacy in other ways. One other distinction I want to make here at the outset is social media monitoring versus social media listening. And there's some overlap, and it's not like if I were in class, I wouldn't say, students, I'm going to give you a test question about, define one or the other, but I think it does help our understanding, which is why I want to share that. So social media monitoring is really when you're looking for your brand. What are people saying about our brand specifically? That provides you opportunities to engage with, folks that are commenting on social media about your brand. And don't get overwhelmed by that because some of the research finds that we don't have to answer every single comment, that even seeing responses to one user's comment gives us a sense an organization is engaging, even if they haven't done so directly with us. Social media monitoring also provides you an opportunity to look for potential crisis situations and identify those early on. Now, by comparison, social media listening is more question and query driven. We have specific things we're trying to learn more about. They may not be specific to our organization. It goes beyond our brand name to include other things, like we'll look at today with the listening query we're doing about ranked choice voting. So they're related concepts, but different outcomes. A quick anecdote that I'm going to share to illustrate this, that social media monitoring, where we're looking at our brand. I live in Tennessee. I'm not a native Tennessean. My wife is. About 4 years ago, I think it was, we were in our downstairs bathroom with our kids with bike helmets on our head because there's tornadoes potentially in the area. Something I've had to get used to that I'm still not used to. But my daughter gets very anxious in those situations, and so we were trying to keep things light. And there was a Geico commercial that featured a rap artist tag team that did a song back many years ago. Whoop, there it is. And it was part of the commercial. So my wife and I kind of did a karaoke version of this. My daughter was young enough now. I mean, now I would totally be cringe in her opinion. Probably still would have been at that time, but she was a little more open to it. But so we do this karaoke, and I wind up tweeting about it and kind of share the story and the fact that we did this. And a day after, you see the response there at the bottom. Geico responded, "Hope everyone's okay." And that's social media monitoring, right? They're looking for their brand. You'll notice I didn't tag at Geico. They're doing searches and finding any mentions of it. And this is just an easy chance for them to engage and to tell you the effect that this has. When I showed up to work after this had been posted, someone had printed it out and put it on my office door. So that's social media monitoring. We're going to be talking about social media listening. Again, query driven. We use a program called Brandwatch at the Social Media Insights Lab at MTSU, but there are a lot of platforms that do this. And you can learn about queries and get to various levels of sophistication. What I did with this kind of kept it at a broader level to learn about ranked choice voting. But when we think about gathering information, we think about common questions we'll ask, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. thinking of those in a social listening space, we can think about that who in terms of which users or journalists are talking about this topic. What are they saying about it? When are these conversations and discussions taking place? Which platforms or outlets are they using? Why are they talking about it? How are they talking about it? All of these things can lead us to good information and insights. I tend to think the why and the how are often why people have a lot of queries, is to get at like, why are people talking about this? How are they talking about this? And we can see in the advocacy space a lot of uses for this. How people talking about it, for example, can tell us a lot about the messaging and which words to use and which words to avoid. So we start with that. Now, I want to share here, I want to kind of work backwards and share some insights I came away with. I'm not an expert in ranked choice voting, and I'll say that at the outset, but I did a query for ranked choice voting using Brandwatch. We'll also look at some free tools if you don't have access to Brandwatch or the budget for it, some other free tools that you can use. But I'm going to share some insights and then work backwards and show you how I got to those. I think that's important. And that's one lesson I'd say is a key takeaway with this. I've been on webinars before about social media listening, and folks are sharing insights of here are the top insights about this brand, this topic. And I've been very surprised that they share the insights and explain them, but don't actually show how they got there, don't show the data behind it. And that matters. And so I'm going to share with you how I got to these insights. So there's four of these. First is that high profile events like elections and referendums bring attention, in this case, to ranked choice voting. So again, we'll talk about this more in depth, but years ago, I remember in grad school being introduced to a political communication theory about focusing events, which kind of fell in love with the theory. I thought it was so interesting, but it's basically the idea that when something major and in this case, often unexpected happens, that there are a lot of organizations that are looking to attach their explanation to the issue because if it gets accepted within the media and within the public as that explanation, well, that's where attention is going to go to, that's where funding is going to go to, policy resolution is going to go to, those sorts of things. So that kind of resonates here with the data I was looking at, with the high profile events we're looking at being elections that were using ranked choice voting. Another insight that I came away with is that timely posts can produce engagement in unexpected places. I'll talk a little bit more about this and how Instagram, leading up to the New York City mayoral primary, actually had a lot of engagement and what we can learn from that. Uh, I think this third, if you're working in ranked choice voting, would be encouraging an insight that many people are curious about how and whether ranked choice voting works. And one of the things I'll talk about with that I think is important is that, again, it's not, social media isn't a place that's a referendum representative of public opinion. But it can give us the impression that this has been decided. Even sometimes news media stories can do that. But if we look at some of what's happening online, we can see that there are a lot of people that are still undecided about this and trying to figure it out, which really produces an opportunity for folks working on the issue and communication around it. And then finally, the insight we'll discuss is unexpected sources can inform understandings of ranked choice voting. And what I'll talk about there is, interestingly, how the WNBA used ranked choice voting with their All-Star game this year and what that means for folks that might be working in this area. So let's start now working backwards with this first insight of high-profile events bringing attention to the issue. So the program here, this is the one we use of Brandwatch, and it returns a lot of information on its dashboard right away. The time frame I used here was October 1st, 2024 to August 6th, 2025. And when you look at that graph that's on your screen, right away we can see different peaks, right? And so there's information there. What I always tell students with this is to be careful because you can get a lot of information that's easily accessible and understandable, but you really have to dig a little deeper in order to understand what's happening. As a quick example of that, when we first got Brandwatch, we were tracking just MTSU, simple MTSU references online. And one weekend, I happened to pull up Brandwatch and look in the data, and there's this spike in attention to MTSU and caught my attention. I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I wonder what's going on. Maybe this is a good thing. And then when you click deeper, you can get more information, including sentiment analysis, positive or negative, and type of emotions people are expressing. And it was overwhelmingly negative, and the emotion was anger. And I'm like, oh no, what is going on with MTSU? Well, it turns out that that fall, MTSU is not known for its prowess on the football field, but this particular season, they beat the University of Miami. And so The added attention was because they had beaten Miami, and a lot of the people that were on social media talking about it were Miami fans, which explained the negativity and which explained the anger. And I share that often with students to say, you got to look deeper to understand why is this going on, what's happening there. But those peaks are significant for us as we look at them. And if, in Brandwatch, you can click on it, you can see the actual messages themselves. You can get an AI summary of all the messages. So it helps you to get a feel beyond that. But those peaks align with elections, and June 25th, that's right around when our New York City mayoral primary, there was a lot of attention to this issue. So that is informative for us, but we don't necessarily have to have Brandwatch to figure this out. A free resource that's available to us is Google Trends. And Google Trends, you can set the time frame on that. You can find terms that people are looking for. So these are searches that I had for ranked choice voting. Now, these are search terms, and I just want to make one distinction. If you do wind up using Google Trends, if they happen to have a topic around it, that's a good thing, because the difference when you have a topic is that that is accounting for misspellings or other ways people refer to that topic to give you a broader look at what's being talked about. But in this case, the pattern holds in terms of timing. We see those two peaks there. And November, a lot of attention there around various ranked choice referendums happening, including a lot of attention here was to Alaska and people voting on whether to keep ranked choice voting. So that's a simple way. But even in Google Trends, you can dig deeper. You can see related searches. You can see geography of where people are searching, the sort of information that can help us to fine tune our messages and target them more accurately. So here, just looking at that ranked choice voting in November, we can see Alaska leading the way with attention to that. But this allows us, again, thinking about where we might want to pinpoint our message, where there's an opportunity where people are curious about this, where they're hearing about it. So with each of these insights, I want to kind of give some potential action items. So one for this section, for this first insight, would be just to be prepared for high profile events. Think of them like these focusing events, trying to get our prepackaged messages accepted. People are going to be messaging about ranked choice voting, and if we leave that space, that can leave a lot of the anti ranked choice voting out there. But more importantly, we just want people to be accurately informed, and this is a time when people are looking at it. And again, we can target that specifically to a geographic region or even more broadly. Now, our second insight, timely posts can produce engagement in unexpected places. And I'm going to start by showing the dashboard that led me to this. So there's lots of information that Brandwatch gives back to us. This report itself, at the end, I have a link that everyone can get to that will show all the data. It's static, so it's not updating beyond when I saved it. But you can see the same sort of things and the variety of things that are available in this program. But looking through the data, I was surprised to see Instagram pop up right after X. X wasn't a surprise that in this time frame there was a lot of conversation, but Instagram kind of surprised me, and that sometimes happens with this insights. You have a query, and that's driving you. But then going in, it's like, what's interesting here? What seems different? What can I learn from? And with Instagram, we can only have access to public posts. If anyone has their account set to private, we're not able to see it. So when it pops up, it feels a little bit more significant. So I dug a little deeper on it, and now we get a time frame, and we can really see that this is all clustered during this time frame and into that June time period. So we can see that, again, this is around that New York City mayoral primary. So then we dig in to say, well, what's happening there? What is generating? Now, keep in mind, this is at the top of the graph, it shows this is engagement score. So this one isn't just people are talking about it, but this is where people are engaging with posts. Oftentimes, what happens in social media, we get really enamored with big accounts, lots of followers, but we also want to consider, or maybe instead want to consider, engagement, right? Even if you have a smaller audience, if they're more engaged, that's going to be more valuable, whether you're working in the nonprofit advocacy space, whether you're working for a major brand. So we see a lot of engagement around these posts. So here are 4 posts from that time period, and we see different sources on the page there, from the Amsterdam News on June 24th and the Federalist on June 24th, to an interview that a candidate did on the Breakfast Club on June 17th, and then the more personal post about an experience with an elected official there on June 17th. So these posts were generating tremendous engagement and causing that spike that we saw. But again, if you just ask me at the outset, like, hey, Instagram, do we want to do a lot of work there? We have limited resources. We're trying to figure out where to follow it. Instagram wouldn't be the first thing that would come to mind, but here we see that around that election, it generated engagement. So again, that goes back into we can find unusual sources or unexpected sources where we can share our message, especially around these major events. So really the action item for this second insight that I would share is that be prepared to spread your message across platforms, especially during high profile events. You can also just engage with posts, right? Maybe if you don't even have an Instagram account, you could still engage with accounts that are there, or I shouldn't say you don't have an account, but one that you don't post on regularly. Opportunity, and this is the sort of thing if you wanted to do, again for free, just go into that in the search box on Instagram, and we can look through around major events, see what people are posting about ranked choice voting, and we can be engaged in that conversation, again, in maybe traditional places we expect and maybe some unexpected places. This third insight, many people are curious about how and whether ranked choice voting works. So if we go back to our free resources here, this is Google Trends. And when we get that original data that I shared, we saw the peaks in November and June. So I looked for what's called related queries. What else are people searching for in relation to this topic? And so looking at November and looking at June, and I want to draw your attention to a couple of these. In November, the second related query in terms of getting more attention is what is ranked choice voting? Moving over to June, 4 and 5 there, explain ranked choice voting pros and cons. So again, on social media, maybe we look at it, and as I was looking through this data, I saw lots of negative messaging about ranked choice voting, saw a lot of what felt like talking points against it, maybe even using more extreme language, as we see that a lot on social media. But this allows us to peek back and say, wait a second, there's an audience out there that doesn't know what this is and wants to know what it is, right? And so that is an educational opportunity. The other thing, if you get interested in Google Trends, again, it's a free resource, but this section of rising, they provide rising and then top. And what that basic distinction is that rising is during the the time period that you've used, that topic has all of a sudden gained in significance during that time period. Top will just give you these were the overall top searches during that time period overall. So it's just a slight distinction that's made there. And we do see some overlap, but it is something as you get familiar with this. And they have really friendly user tutorials, very brief on YouTube that introduce you to Google Trends, encourage you different ways to look at the data. And these are all things, again, you can dive more deeply and find more from these. Another way I got curious after seeing this is saying, well, what is a basic Google search? So using the Google search engine, you'll see, people also search for, and we see similar sorts of things. Ranked choice voting pros and cons. Who is against ranked choice voting? Ranked choice voting explained. So this is telling us like there is a curiosity that's out there about this and understanding it, and that there are clearly plenty of people that still are in that space of trying to figure out what it is, and therefore you would assume where they might stand on it. Now, we're going to get more into this particular insight, but I want to take a step back and say why Google data? Because for me, this would be something too, before I read this book, where I would say, why does this matter, right? And I picked up this book just by chance. Kind of wonderful, that experience of being at a bookstore and you're browsing and you happen to pick a winner, right? I've had the other experience, which is disappointing. But in this case, I was at a conference in Toronto, stopped in a bookstore, came across it, and loved the book. And um, the author is a data scientist, has access to Google data, and it goes a lot beyond what we're seeing in just Google Trends or anything like that. But it points to a larger issue that search data has a lot of value. And he basically makes the argument that search data is like a truth serum. And he compares it to opinion polling, where he says we have issues like self-report and the things we know can complicate any kind of opinion polling by saying, even though we know Google data isn't really private, it feels that way. We search from our home. And he shows all these correlations along the way of predictive abilities that come from Google searches, but also ways to see how people are responding to things. I want to share this, a couple of reasons. One, I have the quote up there. The final and I think most powerful value in this data is its ability to lead us from problems to solutions. With more understanding, we might find ways to reduce the world's supply of nasty attitudes. Certain hopefulness in that, and I know especially with story change power, that's the vibe we're going for. So I think there's encouragement there. But I also want to share an example from the book that shows kind of how this Google data can be valuable and can lead us in certain directions when it comes to advocacy communication. So they used the example when Barack Obama was president, there was a shooting in San Bernardino, and the shooter was a Muslim. And so Barack Obama gave a speech. And in that, he was calling for people, making this call for people to come together, not to hate, not to express hatred toward Muslims or other groups. And the speech itself was extremely well received in terms of news media reporting on it, and feeling like this is a very positive message. Well, the author's telling us, like looking at the Google data, that wasn't the case where it was this big positive. It said that during and after the speech, searches for Muslims that called them terrorists, bad, violent, and evil doubled. This is again during the speech. Searches for kill Muslims tripled during the speech. And they said just about every negative term they could think of increased during Obama's speech, and every positive search declined. Now, I said I was going to give hopefulness. This doesn't sound very hopeful, does it? But we're going to get there. So he talks about this and says, hey, we're hearing this as a great speech, and it's calming the angry mob, but the search data is showing us the opposite, right? That people are even more inflamed. But then he points to a moment where things were different. And I'm going to read some here from what he said. He said, recall that every time he argued that people should respect Muslims more, the people he was trying to reach became more enraged. Google searches, however, revealed there was one line that did trigger the type of response Obama might have wanted. He said, quote, Muslim Americans are our friends and our neighbors, our coworkers, our sports heroes, and yes, they are our men and women in uniform who are willing to die in defense of our country. And he said, after this line, for the first time in more than a year, so they even looked at data before the speech, the top Googled noun after Muslim was not terrorists, extremists, or refugees. It was athletes, followed by soldiers. And in fact, athletes kept the top spot for a full day afterwards. And the author tells us his takeaway, when we lecture angry people, the search data implies that their fury can grow, but subtly provoking people's curiosity, giving new information, and not offering new images of the group that is stoking their rage may turn their thoughts in different, more positive directions. So I think there is some hopefulness in that. It also talks about the value of Google data. And if we think about it, even say with this issue with ranked choice voting, if we think about it in terms of educating people, providing them ways to look for more information rather than kind of feeling like we're lecturing them about the topic or giving into the angry rhetoric that we see plenty of online. Now, going back to that insight of people being curious about how and whether ranked choice voting works, after seeing this in the Google Trends data, I went back and was looking a little bit more at our Brandwatch data. One of the things it can give us is the most engaged subreddit. So you can look at Reddit generally, but then also within Reddit, which subreddits are talking about this. And we see one for Ask Reddit. So diving deeper, what was going on there? Where were people talking about it? And you can go in and see specific mentions. So I have a screenshot of that I just put up there. But you see the overall question that's being asked in Reddit, right, is how do you feel about removing the Electoral College and replacing it with most votes win format for national elections? So we can see that the question asked wasn't about ranked choice voting specifically, but the overall question generated a lot of engagement, and that within that, people were talking about ranked choice voting, and we can look at what they were saying to get a feel for what arguments are out there, what's accurate, what's inaccurate, what do we need to be communicating. I want to stay on Reddit to finish up this section. That Reddit is another resource we could use for free if we're trying to understand an issue through social listening and we don't have the money for tools like Brandwatch. Ranked choice voting, this is just 4 different subreddits that are on the platform about this topic. So knowing the terms people can use, but you can even just go into the search box, put in ranked choice voting, and it'll bring up these different communities. So that gives us a chance to do some listening. Now, Reddit's gotten a bad reputation over time, but folks within the social listening community, I've heard some folks are real advocates for it. And even in my own research, it wasn't about advocacy specifically, but did a comparison of people's response to a particular issue, and comparing X now versus Reddit. And it was interesting to see the pattern where, with it being more in a forum space and a community space, that there were a lot more thoughtful responses and ongoing debates rather than kind of one-off shots here and there. So that can be another way to do some social listening in a way that is accessible to us. So the overall action item I'd say for this section is like, don't be swayed by general perceptions in social media or the news media. Social media and the news could lead us to believe in the ranked choice voting that the verdict's in, when in truth, the jury's still out. So find what questions are people asking and find what talking points are trying to be used to try and sway them in their responses. The final insight that I want to share here: unexpected sources can shape perceptions. And I'll just say selfishly, this was my favorite insight because it was a little different and a little fun to look at. Brandwatch returned the top online news authors for me. And as I look through those, one of the first things that strikes you is that the foxnews.com, here we're not looking at overall mentions of the issue. You'll see just one mention, but then they have these measures of impact and reach, and that's how these are ranked. So it gives us a sense of not just that it was mentioned, but that people's engagement with it and the overall audience that can actually be reached with it. Fox News references, a lot of those were just using a homo quote after the prime side what to do in the general election. But the one at the top there, Chantel Jennings, it was interesting to me. It's NewYorkTimes.com, but they own The Athletic now, a sports publication. And so I wanted to dive a little deeper and see, why are they talking in The Athletic about ranked choice voting? Well, so the WNBA for their All-Star game, turns out they use ranked choice voting. And so they had a story. Why did Caitlin Clark receive low All-Star game votes from her WNBA peers? And I actually had to read this, I was scanning it, and it took me a couple times to even find the mention. But that mentions there the last paragraph of the article: fans, players, and media voting was ranked choice voting. And then they go on to talk about, just generally who's voting there. And a couple of things in looking at this, you rarely see rank choice. You ranked choice. So even the choice of terminology there is different from what is commonly used. But also, there's no real explanation for this and a potential for it to be negative, because if someone was looking closely, they could say, oh, well, so Caitlin Clark, clearly a major all-star, but ranked choice voting, that must have messed everything up. So we could look at this as an opportunity to educate. There are a couple ways we could do this, as the action items for this. One is to think about, lots of advocacy organizations have style guides for journalists, or maybe even just follow up with journalists after stories. So there could be a style guide that explains, these are the terms. This is how we refer to ranked choice voting and different names for it. This is what it actually means. Because you'll notice this story doesn't actually explain what it is. Separately, this could provide an interesting opportunity to communicate about the issue, but outside of the political space, where maybe people's guards are down a little bit more, right? Where maybe that leading up to the WNBA All-Star game, we can do content that, here's a video on, hey, the WNBA All-Stars are using ranked choice voting. What is that? And what does that mean? Or a variety of other ways that we could create fun content in a non-traditional space where we could educate people about this and also guard against any misperceptions that might come out of it, including that, oh, this just screwed things up because Caitlin Clark didn't come out at top. So those unexpected places can provide us some unique opportunities for engagement. So I want to go back to my initial story about this writing test I was doing with the American Cancer Society. And again, reiterate, social listening involves a lot of the same skills that are involved with effective messaging, absent social media. Key among these: knowing your audience, understanding which information to use and which information to discard, and really finding messages that resonate with your audience. That this can be a valuable tool overall to include as part of your communications efforts, to identify how to communicate, opportunities of when to communicate, and just answer questions about, trying to figure out what people are really thinking. Again, not as a referendum necessarily, not as public opinion, but how are people talking about this and what questions do they need to have answered with it. And here at the end, I've got a QR code and link there at the top, that Brandwatch data that I mentioned on ranked choice voting. That bit.ly link and the QR code will take you to both of those. It's password protected, case sensitive, with the capital S and storage change power, the number 9 and the $sign. That's available to you, and you can look through all the data I provided and more from Brandwatch about ranked choice voting. Also provided links to the MTSU Social Media Insights Lab, which is our lab at the university. I'm happy to continue the conversation with anyone that wants to learn more or even work with us on a particular topic. And then Google Trends, that trends data, you can look at that as a resource. So I'll finish it up there, and I look forward to the conversation with you all and hopefully trying to address any questions that might have come up today.
Matt, thank you so much. I am leaving this feeling really inspired, thinking of social listening as a tool to cut through the clutter. And just this morning, I was talking with someone else who's in the space of promoting civic engagement and bridging divides, building trust, all the different ways that we talk about it. And we're both lamenting how challenging it can be to cut through. I mean, nobody on the call needs me to tell them. It can just feel like a world of just constant information. So I'm seeing social listening as a way to cut through that, to really understand what's being said truly beyond headlines, and to make the most of different opportunities. But I'm curious, and I appreciate you mentioning the tools for folks that have smaller budgets and smaller teams. What advice would you give people to convince others on their team that this is worthwhile investment of time at minimum, and maybe more, to invest in the tools that can do social listening?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate also that you mentioned time as an investment. We have students in our public relations track that, as when they're seniors, they take a class where they actually do a project for a client, and we work often with a lot of small nonprofits, and inevitably students come to, oh, their social media isn't very good, right? And they come at it initially from, we've got to tell them how to do this, and I remind them that lots of these folks know how to do it, right? It's resources. So as you make these recommendations, be aware of resources, including the resource of time. And if you're making that recommendation, who's going to be doing it? Because social media can be very consuming that way. I think in some ways it can be kind of a proof of concept thing that maybe if we use it to inform some of what we're doing, I think even at first it can even be informing communication we're doing, messaging that we can be using it on our own. And if someone finds, oh, I like that message, I like how it resonates. Oh, well, you know how I got to that. But the reality is that, anything new is difficult to sell. And often, my experience both in advocacy, but then also working in nonprofit communications, you get a title of director of communications and feel like, oh, well, I'm the expert. And then you realize that you're the expert for about a day, right? Like they hire you for that expertise, but then you start talking about communication, and people that have nothing to do with communication start steering strategy. Communication is something that everyone feels like they know, and that's just the reality. And I think it's important to be aware of that. And that when we introduce something like social listening, it may take several conversations, and it may take successes on our part. It may also take failures on someone else's part. And we don't want anyone else to fail. But sometimes in my own career, not with social listening specifically, but with other things, I once worked for a boss who told me from day one, I don't know communications. I know nothing about this stuff. And in one particular case, I had made a recommendation that he kind of pushed aside, and I kind of pushed back gently, and he wasn't having it. And it turned out that he got to a place where he realized he'd made a mistake. And to his credit, he owned that in a meeting of our leadership team. And so we took a loss in that case where we hadn't communicated when we should have, which I think hurt us with the perception of our key audiences. But it was a good lesson for me and for him, where I was like, okay, he's willing to learn, right? He sees, okay, I made a mistake here. And he said in that meeting, okay, moving forward, Matt's going to handle this. So sometimes it's through convincing in the positive. Sometimes it's maybe someone misses an opportunity and they say, okay, next time we're going to be listening more.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great example of a boss to recognize, like, I do not know communications, because I think we've seen many examples of folks who assume they do
Mhm.
and don't appreciate all that goes into it. So we will share all the codes in a follow-up email, and folks will have a recording. So if you don't mind unsharing your screen, we can see everybody
Sure.
a bit more, see your face. And we've got a great question coming in from the Q&A. And other folks, as you've got questions, please pop those in. But this is coming from Caitlin, with two questions. We'll start with the first. Do you believe the tone and culture of different platforms bring nuance to the data that comes from them? For example, you may be more professional on LinkedIn, there's a lot of anonymity on Reddit, and more conversational on X.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a really key point, which is understanding how these platforms work. And that goes back to, when you have access to a tool like Brandwatch, it's great in that it can give you all this information, but it can be misleading if you're not careful and not critical with it. And so I think understanding the nuances of a platform, understanding how people communicate on that platform is very important. So having some knowledge or familiarity with that, and I think if you were working on a particular issue, you could get a feel for that pretty quickly. But I do think that's a really important consideration, the tone and the language that's used there. And if we are going to use these platforms, understanding that we need to adjust our message by platform. We don't just kind of shoot out the same thing across the board. It can be the same basic message, but just presented differently by platform.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and another great question here. I think this is probably top of mind for a lot of folks with all the rise of bot accounts. How has that affected social listening? And is there a way to combat or filter, particularly, without having really sophisticated software?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I've been on webinars with social listening professionals who are, doing this as a career and know it more deeply than I do, and even that concern is there. I think there's a reality that first we have to acknowledge, yes, right, there are a lot of bots. Again, familiarity with platforms, that we know that X now has a whole lot of bots that are on there spreading messages. So I think being aware of that by platform. This isn't necessarily unique now to just social media, though. If we think back to time before social media was as dominant, even just with when the internet comes about, we've got emails, we've got grassroots versus astroturfing, right? So these are things that people have to adjust to and learn. I think as you develop a critical eye and you look at things, you can get a feel. And there are certain kind of triggers when we look at messages where we can say, I'm seeing this same message a lot. I'm seeing this same wording. And that also goes back to, the one study I mentioned that was looking at a Twitter chat that, there's a lot of engagement overall in it. But then when you look more precisely, you see, okay, there's a small group of people that are participating more in this. So there are ways that you can look at what's happening a little more finely and figure out like, are we being misled here potentially by bot content, or is this authentic conversation? And again, I think it is going to vary by platform as well.
Yeah, we're actually going to dig into misinformation. We'll be representing a lot of Tennessee universities in the next 2 months. So next month, digging into misinformation. Seeing a question here from Mike: Are there people working on identifying more bot accounts automatically or algorithmically?
The honest answer is I'm not sure. I know, well, in terms of individuals, I know there are organizations that are working to try and develop tools that will kind of fine tune things. And I think it's one of those things where like any kind of technology, anything that's new, as it adjusts, as it adapts, we have to adapt with it. New challenges come about. Certain, almost like a game of whack-a-mole, in some sense. But I even think about that like as a corollary outside of advocacy. A lot of concern with social media has existed over time about kids and social media, the effects it has on them. How do we manage it? And you look at some of the literature in that area and they'll talk about there is some encouragement because we're reaching a point now where um, parents are themselves becoming digital natives. So
Mm.
just by virtue of people that have lived a whole life with it now, they're going to parent differently because they understand it better. And so if we bring that back to the advocacy communication world and this question of bots and this sort of thing, like I think it's one where we keep up, we adapt, and the more we get used to it, the better we can be. But I don't have individual names, but I know there are organizations that are looking at it because it's a top of mind concern and it's a realistic concern. If anyone told you, hey, we can do this social listening and bots aren't an issue, I'd be thinking critically about that and kind of digging deeper to say how are you doing that? What tools are you using?
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And we're getting a lot of great questions here. One from Tiffany asking, what role has hashtag measurements played in your social listening?
So, and that is a great question. I love these questions. Um,
Got always great participants. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things like in the Brand Watch program that we have, they do have a section that will give you hashtags that are most popular and utilized most often. And there is a lot of useful information in that, whether it's how we communicate and which hashtags we use that are going to potentially reach a larger audience with that. But also because we can dive deeper, we can look at how that hashtag is being used. Like, okay, it's popular. Let me click on this now and see how it's being used, who's using it, and give us a sense of kind of what people are doing with that hashtag. So I think it is valuable both in terms of tracking the conversation, what people are saying, in larger quantities, but then also potentially for us with our messaging, hey, this is a tag that people are using that might be a way to reach that audience and extend that reach there. It can also just serve a basic organizing function. If we go back to again being on a free platform, we could look for a particular hashtag, right? And then find all
Mhm.
the mentions of that, and it can serve that organizing function for us as well.
Good deal. I see a question here. Mike, we're going to save that one on misinformation for next month. Matt, I'll give you a chance there if it is something. Let's see. I think you mentioned folks working to identify networks and to kind of combat misinformation. Does that sound like something maybe we save for next month's webinar?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, but I think if you're doing a webinar on it, first sign me
Okay.
up. And then second, yeah, I think that is probably good to get a lot more depth to that.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So thank you, Mike. We've got us thinking already for next month. A question here from Anthony. Do best practices change when it comes to socially and politically incendiary topics? For example, we're seeing it in health and science, communication space, vaccines are especially, very charged now. And that seems like what used to be a simple conversation is turning into a fight now extremely quickly. How do social listening practices adapt to that kind of environment?
hmm And part of the answer to that is going to depend, I think, on the organization. So your organization has a brand voice, and how you engage online should be consistent with that brand voice. I think it is important, as especially as we think of brand voice, not to chase different things as they come up, as prominent and heavy as some of this things might feel now with, whether it's misinformation around health information, these sort of things. We have to realize that, especially if we're an organization that has a trusted voice and a brand there, that we need to also be looking beyond this time period and saying we want to keep that and restore it. But at the same time, I think it's important to know what's being said. It's important to see how it's being said to combat that, even with, I think, reasonable information. Always good to have that reminder that the way that social media is structured and the algorithms that
Mm,
outrage is rewarded. And again, that goes back to that point about it not representing public opinion, that we can become overwhelmed and see a lot of that information on social media and feel like, everybody is falling for this misinformation. But then again, if we go to that diving deeper, if we could do queries and see like how are people talking about this? What questions might they be asking through, if we look at a Google Trends, are people, hey, what's true, what's not, this sort of thing. So I think it's important to stay consistent with your brand voice. I think it's very important to be aware of the more incendiary messages that are out there. And you can combat those, but I think kind of going head to head with those necessarily, if you go outside your brand voice, might put you in a bad spot in the long term. That's a mix of kind of insight, but then also a mix of personal opinion in there. So that's why I go back to, like, it's going to depend on your organization. There may be organizations that are more kind of gloves off and want to do that, and this would provide a space that you could see, okay, here's a space we need to be because that message is out there, with this particular platform, with this particular community, and we're going to come in and fighting. But that's going to be more, I think, organization dependent.
yeah, such a good reminder too, to be thinking of both, identifying the short-term opportunities and then thinking for the long term as well. I have an anonymous question here about using trending tags that are unrelated to the issue that
Hmm.
your organization is addressing, to your advocacy, like using trending tags to manipulate the algorithm into showing content. And that may be specifically where there's, you can pick a crisis for right now and then tagging on to that so that their information is more widely seen.
Yeah, and again, probably getting more in the personal perspective on it, but I would be careful with that, be cautious, because again, uh, having your message seen and heard is obviously important, right? There are ways that I think we can do that maybe keep us from having to feel like we're at all misleading. I mean, I think one thing and I find this a lot with my students, we tend to look at people online and maybe have this stereotype of very gullible, and we remove critical thinking. And those are legitimate concerns, but there are also a lot of people that are on these platforms. I mean, think of people that are in your own social circle that are on these platforms, right? And so I think understanding that there are reasonable people, and I find that with younger people, while they get, I deal with college students and, a lot of negative perception of college students, but they are digital natives. And one of the things that for lack of a better term, their BS meter is pretty strong. And
Mhm.
so they can see through it, and authenticity matters to them. So if they see us kind of just trying to hop on a trend to get our message there, that might lead to a rejection there. So I'd advise caution with that. I mean, I think it's good to be aware of spaces that are getting that attention. But I'll go back to that point about, right, social media is one piece of a larger strategic communications plan. And so there may be other ways to get attention. There may be better forms to get attention. Good to be aware of it, but I think we want to be cautious, especially just trying to keep in mind there are reasonable people on platforms, and they do have a good meter sometimes for things that aren't authentic. And again, that goes back to kind of our brand voice. Like the most valuable thing we have really is kind of our brand, right? And in this space like social media, that is the risk of it, is that we could do real damage to our brand if we're not careful. And I think sometimes that's even why leaders get nervous, right? Like, we're just going to let you go in that space. Like, to be successful, you have to operate quickly. And when we're operating quickly, that can lead to emotional responses and things that could hurt our brand. But I think it's important to keep that in mind of who we are. Are we a trusted resource? Can we stay a trusted resource at a time when there's bad information, so that people still look at us that way now, and then especially further down the line.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that underscores the importance of having a lot of conversations in advance. Where do we weigh in? Where do we not? How can we be nimble and also consistent? And I think we can all think of examples of some really cringe, happenings where people didn't do their homework in advance.
Yeah, well, and if I could just provide one quick anecdote that
Yeah.
speaks to this, and I share it because it was a learning experience for me. When I was at the Cancer Society, we had a new hire that, we had several different teams, including a team that worked on our lobbying efforts. And we had someone come take over a lead role that had just come off Capitol Hill. And this was before social media had really taken off, so blogging was more important. And he was just at home one night and saw someone blogging, negative information about the Cancer Society. And so he went on and just fired off, some comments. And there had to be a larger conversation like you're speaking to within the organization, because he's like, hey, I'm on Capitol Hill, right? It's like you punch back. And so they
Mm,
talk more about, this is who we are as an organization. It's different here, right? Like, your Capitol Hill expertise is extremely valuable to us, but we also need to understand the way we message things is going to be different in this space, and understanding that not only does that carry our brand, but like, take a step back. That blog, not a lot of readers, right? But you've now brought more attention to them. So
yeah.
he was doing something that was very genuine, right? He's a new employee. I love this organization. I'm going to show him what I can do. But we needed that internal conversation to say, okay,
Mhm.
the ethos is a little different here. And also, like, this brings more negatives in terms of, we don't want the attention, right? No one's going to be paying attention to that message. They are now.
Yeah. That's such a good point and so complicated. I think anybody who's worked in organizations, knowing we have that balance of everybody has their own voice. You want them to use it, but when you're speaking on behalf of an organization, whether you think you are or not, and all that notion of like my opinions are my own. I mean, I think we've been around long enough to know that that little disclaimer doesn't do what we 10 years ago might have hoped it did. So got a great comment here from Mike about remembering how many people on social media are there listening and not themselves posting. And so we may not know, those folks who are silent, what they're really thinking. And he's asking, is there a way to use social media to illuminate more like what that silent population may be thinking or seeing?
Yeah, that really is an interesting question, and almost a fun challenge. And that's where there are different levels of sophistication with social listening, both in terms of the way you structure a query. But even I think it's that, to me, that reads as something that would just be a really deep dive, right? Like, we find the places that people are talking about an issue, but then if we actually get on that platform and see, like, take Reddit, for example, you can see, who are the members of this platform, and that kind of unspoken population. It's really interesting thought of trying to contact or connect with them. And I'll say like that is such a good point, and it's been true with different platforms. When we had blogging as the kind of the primary thing before social media, they would talk about lurkers, right? Like because people would do blogs and they wouldn't be getting comments like, why aren't people commenting on this? And they point out like the largest part of your audience are lurkers. They're people that are reading the content, but they're not engaging, they're not showing themselves. That happens on social media as well. It's a great reminder in terms of not being misled by social media, but I really love the idea of trying to find some of those folks. What are they on forums? Are they in spaces? Because we think often of the voices that are we're hearing the most or getting the most engagement, but I would think those folks would matter a lot too, right? Like they are curious, but not part of the conversation directly. That's a fun exercise and fun thought with that.
One specific question. I want to be mindful and respectful of everybody's time. So last one here. That's okay. Maybe, and plus one more. But does Brandwatch have the ability, can you judge upvotes and downvotes and get insight into to lurkers at all?
Upvotes and down, yeah, and Brandwatch is pretty sophisticated in terms of the data that it can provide. It's very user friendly. They do, you know, you have to be cautious. That would be a better measure there, because like I mentioned, sentiment analysis, and also it'll give you the emotions themselves. And there's a lot of caution within the social listening community of taking those at face value because
Mhm.
um, sentiment measures can be varying qualities. And so really with those sort of things, you want to dive in and see like, okay, when it says angry post, what is an angry post? When it's saying negative, what does that mean? But yes, if in terms of finding specific responses to content, you can dig in. I did a broader search, but you can also focus a search on a specific platform, right? What are people are doing on Reddit? What are people doing on YouTube and that sort of thing? And so there's that opportunity to search broadly or even to look at, hey, I'm really curious. I feel like, say, Reddit is an important space. I'm going to dive deeper. You can obviously do that directly through Reddit, but you can also develop searches through Brandwatch that allow you to look more in a more sophisticated way at what's happening there.
Got it. Okay. And the one question I cannot resist, particularly today, because we covered so much, is if there is one thing that you want everybody to remember, what is that thing?
Uh, it's really that's a really good question. Um, and I'd go back to kind of when I was looking at the book there that was talking about Google data and kind of the
Mhm.
hopefulness it provided. And that provided a counter of there's lots of negativity. They're finding all this negativity and it can be dispiriting. And then in there that there's that nugget of hope, like, oh wait, there is that there. So I think in the advocacy space, I think like there's so much negativity around social media, and it can be really daunting. It can be really make you feel like, it's us against the world and we're losing this battle. But I'd say, find the spots for hope. One of the lessons for me working in advocacy was that things take time, right? It's a lot of failed efforts and then the victory finally comes. And I think about some of those things in hindsight, and it's amazing the advancements. So like when I was at the Cancer Society, they were just getting to the point where, with smoking and public bans in restaurants were coming about. And I sometimes I think about that now. I'm like, imagine that. Like that's such an impossible task. And I know they had so many no's along the way before getting to that yes. And I think with this social listening, it can provide that hopefulness where, oh man, it really feels like people are beating up on ranked choice voting right now. Look at these stories saying, oh, people are against it. But then we see, wait, there's that curiosity, right? We can build from that curiosity. So I'd say try and find the hopefulness in the negativity of social media and use that to help your organization.
I love that so much. Thank you, Matt. I mean, what a wonderfully hopeful note to end on. I'm old enough to remember when there was, smoking in restaurants and even the non-smoking section of an airplane. And if anybody on the call is young enough to gasp at that, you're gonna have to believe us that that's actually there was a time. So thank you so much for your insights. Thank you everyone for joining. We will add some things in the chat now to stay in touch with MTSU's lab. There'll be a description in the recording as well. As I mentioned, this is an ongoing series. It is a labor of love, and I could not resist having two webinars next month. We'll be talking about blues reaching reds to use the language of braver angels, using how your language can reach across political divisions. Then later in the month, we'll dive into media and misinformation, and we'll keep your question, Mike, that you already posed in mind. So we've got a head start on that one. When you leave the webinar, a 15-second poll will pop up. Please be a helper, share your feedback. It's incredibly helpful and informs future webinars. For now, everyone, be well, do good, stay healthy and hopeful, and we will see you in September.